Thank you, everybody. Thank you. All right, am I just like pulling this off now? Is it just me?
Is Michael Warren in the house? Is Michael Warren here?
All right, well, now I'm going to sit and lecture you guys then.
I'll sit here with you.
Hey, before we get started, I want to introduce a friend I brought. So, as I hope you guys know, I am really passionate about Ukraine, and there is one person I brought with me that knows the barbarity of Russia even more than I do, because he was wrongfully detained for 2 years in a Russian prison, and that is former U.S. Marine Trevor Reed over there in the back. So I wanted to introduce him because he knows even more than all of us about how important this fight is and how important it is that we push back. So good to be with you, my friend.
We're really honored to have you here.
Thank you.
I kind of want to just tee it up to you on your book. I think it tells the story of your time in Congress, obviously, your time in the Republican Party. It resonates, as someone who came up through college and law school as a Republican, identified as conservative, obviously feel a lot of those things that you felt, the betrayal. Just speak what drove you to write the book, what drove you to take the stands, and just your chief takeaway from the times in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, look, somebody had told me at one point, I never thought I'd write a book, by the way. I honestly, I'm like, why would I write a book? But because somebody told me, they said, it's an inherently kind of arrogant experience to write a book, because you're basically saying, here's a story about me that you're gonna like, right? And but what I realized is I kind of lived through this, from 2010, this kind of early Tea Party, when the Tea Party really wasn't at all like what the Tea Party is today. The early Tea Party was like, hey, we want to cut spending. We had Tea Party rallies where 10,000 people showed up because they were basically just a bunch of Republicans at the time. But I can look back and say, okay, from 2010 to today, here are the different markers I've seen where the Republican Party has become something completely different. And from the party of Ronald Reagan, as we all know, to the party of Vladimir Putin, like how quickly that happened in reality. And so that's why I wrote it, was not really to tell my story, although my story comes out in it, but to tell the story of the broader party so we can see the trends. Because now I have the ability to be able to look back and say, yeah, these are some things I should have seen. I take inventory of myself. Like, look, we learned early on in 2010, you can raise money and you can raise it on fear, right? If I convince you that Nancy Pelosi is going to kill your family, trust me, you will part with anything that you have if you truly believe it. And that fear is addictive in fundraising, and we unfortunately never learned to turn it off. And I think that's part of the reason you're seeing this radicalization. In fact, on the January 6th committee, one of the things that, because we were limited in terms of what we could, time and all that kind of stuff, one of the things I wish we could have gotten more into is the role that fundraising had in actually radicalizing the Republican base between Election Day and January 6th. For instance, we interviewed members of the RNC that would tell us, like, all we had to do was write. Their job was to write fundraising emails. And they're like, we learned that the angrier it was, the more intense it was, we could send it out and we'd raise, $50,000 an email, $100,000 an email. And everybody's inboxes were getting hit with 10 emails a day. And those emails, even if you never open them, you see 10 headlines of things that say like, Pelosi's going to kill you, whatever it is, right? And that radicalized the base in a very short amount of time. And so I wanted to be able to present that, not as because I have the solution, I don't. The solution is us, but because we have to know what the problem is before I think we can find the solution. So did I enjoy writing it? Yes. I talk obviously a lot about my military service and some other stuff, but I just hope if you've read it or if you're going to read it that you see it as like not just me telling my story, but telling the broader story of what's happened to this party that I loved and now I don't recognize.
Well, I'm going to hand my role off here to a professional. And Mr.
Okay.
Mike,
You did a great job,
we
though.
finally tracked down Mr. Mike Warren of the Dispatch.
Right. You did a
we
great
found
job.
him here, so I will switch places with him.
Yeah, you too. He was at the bar.
I will neither confirm nor deny where I was.
Oh my goodness.
You know, when a source calls, you just got to take it. Well, thank you for doing this, and thanks for letting me come here at the last minute here. So I wanted to talk a little bit and ask you about 14 months ago is about when you left Congress, and I wrote down a list of everything that has happened in Congress since then. So I want to go through it here. There was, since you left, a protracted fight over the speakership in which Kevin McCarthy basically gave the House away to the Freedom Caucus. There was an ugly fight internally about the debt limit. It stretched on for weeks. Another fight over spending levels, which found McCarthy ousted, and then another protracted fight over the speaker. Then you had an impeachment inquiry that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. You had this guy, George Santos, ousted from Congress by his own members. So the obvious question is, don't you miss it?
Well, I know one thing. I leave and the whole place goes to hell, so I don't... Before Adam, no worthless impeachment. After Adam, worthless, No, it's funny, and I'm glad you actually asked it. I don't miss it, obviously, at all. I really don't. And, people will, obviously, they'll say, like, well, Kinzinger didn't run again because he wouldn't have won a primary, which is probably true, or he was redistricted, which was true. But truthfully, I had been in 12 years, and I would, without any of the January 6th stuff, without any of the redistricting, I think it was approaching time where it's like, okay, I need to walk away. 12 years is a long time when you're 32. But I don't miss it at all right now because I watch what's going on and I'm like, we are the greatest country in the world. I believe that. And we deserve so much better than this. Like, we deserve so much better than this. But the one thing I will say the only thing I kind of miss is, like, right now, all it takes is 3 or 4 Republicans to go into Speaker Johnson's office and say, we are voting against every rule, and a rule is a required thing to pass to govern any floor action. And you never vote against rules if you're in the majority. If 3 or 4 Republicans walked in and said, we're voting against any rule until you agree to put Ukraine aid on the floor, he would do it in a week. I guarantee you that. I kind of wish I was there to do that right now.
That actually leads me to a question I wanted to ask, which is, you've made the decisions that you've made, and I would safely say ostracized you from your party a little bit. I want you to imagine, and I'm sure as I describe this generic member of Congress, you might come up with some names in your head, and you don't have to say them out loud, but I'm talking about Republicans who share your broad view of Donald Trump, of what is happening to the Republican Party. But these are people who've made a different decision, made a different calculation, and have said, well, maybe I'm willing to compromise on this question of Trump because it's important for me to be in Congress to vote on, say, Ukraine aid or entitlement reform, or to pick the issue that is really important and that the replacement for that Republican member of Congress would vote wrong. What do you think about that divide and that tension? Do you understand where some Republicans are coming from who've made a different calculation than the decision you made?
Yeah, I fully understand it because, that's the battle I had to fight in my own head too, is like, you're going to be replaced by crazier. And the reality is, you see every election cycle, frankly, the GOP has gotten more insane, honestly. And good people, Mike Gallagher, for instance, are leaving, and then you're seeing probably crazier replace it. Where I would take issue is, like, you ultimately take a job, particularly a job in Congress, to do something. right? It's not a job to make a paycheck and to get famous. It can help you do that, and if that's your goal, you can do that. But really, I think it's a job where you have a sacred trust over 700,000 people to be their voice in D.C., whether they agree with you or not. And what you see is this continued sliding slope of like, okay, I can't vote to impeach Donald Trump because I want to survive. And then it's the next thing. And then it's all of a sudden, well, I can't vote for aid to Ukraine because if I do, I'm going to have a primary and I won't survive. And ultimately what you've done is you've just sold everything down the river to where you may not sound as crazy, but you're voting just like the crazy person that's going to replace you would vote. The thing that was different with me, and it's like, I didn't do anything heroic, and I mean this, like nothing, people all the time come up and say like, thank you for, you did something heroic, and I appreciate it, thanks for saying it when you do, but I was just surrounded by cowards. What I did was what I was required to do by the Constitution, which was to uphold it. That's it. And I remember in 2009, I got back from Iraq and made the announcement that I was running for Congress. And I remember saying in an audience, I mean, we had people that would turn out like this much because it was the Tea Party time. And I remember saying, if we're going to ask young people to sign on the dotted line to die for the country, we have to have members of Congress that are willing to give up their career for the same cause, right? I thought it would be like a vote for Social Security reform or something. I didn't know it would be like January 6th. But like, if we're going to have people in those positions that will, salute the casket at Dover when it comes off and talk about how important it is that we have young people that are willing to die for the country, but they are unwilling to do the right thing for the country when that very country is at stake, they don't have a right to be there. They are totally unqualified for that position.
You brought up Mike Gallagher. There have been a number of your former colleagues who are announcing that they're not running, on the Republican side, not running for re-election in the House. And they really run the gamut there are very conservative members, there are more moderate or institutionalist members, there are committee chairs, there are, people who are considered rising stars. Is there one through line with why they are leaving? Because when I ask them, they've got all different reasons, family and this thing. Maybe you're still talking to some of them. What do you think they are thinking?
Yeah, I do talk to some of them still, and I think, I don't know if I can get to the truth either with them, because it's kind of like, I do want to spend more time with my kid, which I understand, and probably that is what you think, but there's something deeper in that, which is like why it really comes down to this. I mean, they've not done anything in a year and a half. And I mean, truly, and I don't say this as like, boy, it's such a huge sacrifice to be in Congress, because there's a lot of perks to it. But if you have a family and you're gone 4 days a week, and those 3 days when you're not gone, 2 of them you're on a plane going to and from, it takes a toll. And you're willing to invest that if that toll is worth something, if you can pass something, right? If you can do something good. If it's just showing up in this inner party battles, which is really what the Republican Party is based on now. It's not based on issues, it's based on how do we fight with ourselves. I think that's part of it. The other interesting thing is, typically when a party is in the majority or they're getting ready to win the presidency, which is quite possible for Donald Trump to win, I hate to say it, but hopefully he doesn't, but usually they all stay because then you get a chance to make some bigger difference. The fact that they're all leaving means I think there's a lot of people that actually fear in their heart of hearts a Trump presidency and what that means and what they will have to swallow and do in order to stay in power.
Something specifically that I've heard, and I know you've touched on it, I've heard from other former members wondering what you're hearing about this as well, which is the general threat of political violence toward members. I mean, it feels like it's the kind of thing that a sitting member doesn't want to talk about, but I know that a lot of former members are concerned that the heightened level of sort of political outrage could lead to kind of mass violence, but also specific violence targeting members of Congress. What can you speak to what's happening, either what your experience is or what you've heard from others?
Yeah, I mean, it's very real. I can go through some of the threats that Sophia and I received, during the January 6th from people that call themselves, the crazy thing is, it's always people that cloak it in religion and Christian language. And as a Christian, that's not the God I follow, okay? And, you know, like some of the threats, like wanting my 6-year-old son to wander out into traffic and get killed, right? Saying I'm part of the devil's army, that was family that sent that one. And so, like, they have the brain worms, some of them. My immediate family's good, but this was extended family. But real threats, and I'm going to tell you the interesting thing, these threats all came, always, when Tucker Carlson would go after me, and you can time it to that moment. And it's always some drunk dude in his basement that gets pissed watching Tucker Carlson and then calls and leaves a message. The reality of it is, those aren't the people that frighten me. Because if you're actually going to do something, you're not going to call and leave a threat. What you're going to do is sit in your basement, get your gun out, clean it, and figure out where I live and go from there. It is a real threat. And it's a real danger that exists. They said to me when I got elected, the joke was, you know, crazies are attracted to Hollywood and politics, right? Which is true. Now they're both basically the same thing. And in a country of 360 million, we all know, we see this every day, there are people that are mentally unwell and that are convinced that people like me or whoever is truly working for a one world government, satanic order, you know, to overthrow the world. So yeah, it's a real threat.
Your thoughts on more general political violence? Whatever happens in November, Donald Trump wins, if Joe Biden wins, violence from the right? Could there be violence from the left? I don't know. What are your thoughts on where we are given, you know, all the work you and the committee did in looking into the origins of what happened on January 6th? Are we alarmed enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because on the one hand, if you read the bluster out there, you're like, okay, we're on the edge of a civil war. On the other hand, you often see that people, like I was just saying this in the green room to somebody, I've never actually in like 3 years had anybody confront me in person, in public. Like people that come up and say nice things, I've never had anybody come up and say anything mean, which you probably didn't expect, but what that shows is, you know, people still kind of have more bluster on the internet than they do in real life. That's a good thing, okay? We don't want them to equal real life bluster. But I do worry, you know, when I predicted violence on January 1st, 2021, I predicted it because being raised a conservative in conservative circles, I was familiar with the language of like, the tree of liberty must be refreshed by the blood of patriots. You know, there could be a day we have to go up against the government. That's the whole, what we were founded on. And if you convince 30% of the country that the election was stolen, I mean, if I truly believed the election was stolen in 2020, I would have been in the Capitol. I would have. And so when you convince people of that, it's real danger. So I do think, on the one hand, I don't think we should be losing sleep about this because I think that's unhealthy. But I think we need to be very aware of the real possibility that right or left, frankly, although it's certainly the right that's the issue, but if Donald Trump loses, you know, he doesn't have the instruments of government at this point, so that's a good thing. But he's going to have much smarter people around him that know their way around the Constitution if he wins. We should be concerned but not lose sleep.
Let's talk about the presidential election. I think it was a spokesman of yours who said that you would consider voting for Donald Trump if his opponent were Satan, and that was the only
I'd
opponent.
abstain at that point.
I'm curious your thoughts on the Republican primary as it is right now. Nikki Haley winning nearly 40% in South Carolina. Illinois' primary is on March 18th. If she's still on the ballot and still running, would you vote for her?
Well, I'm a Texan now, actually.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah, we moved.
Okay, so for the Texas primary.
I went to Texas. That doesn't make, hey, Texas, what's up? At least there's 3 of us that are normal there. Just kidding. All right, perfect. Perfect. I live in the Woodlands now, so. But,
okay.
No, so it's a tough question because if Haley's still in this race, and I hope she stays in this race, like to the very end, I probably at that point will pull a Republican ballot and vote for her because I think it is essential to destroy Trump.
Let me ask you that. Why is it important for Haley to stay in the race?
Because I think Well, first off, I want Donald Trump to be mad every day. I mean, I really do. And he's mad about this. And I think, yesterday, even though people look and say, oh, she got crushed in her own state, she way outperformed the polls, actually. 40% of voters in the Republican primary voted against Donald Trump. And as somebody that still wants to see the Republican Party come back, I think it is essential that people have a choice. And by the way, if Donald Trump is convicted in June, now maybe she's not the one that receives the fallout of that, but maybe she is. It's good to have somebody in there opposed to Trump, I think is important. So yeah, I mean, I would vote for her, but I'm going to tell you right off the bat, if it's Trump against Biden, I'm going to vote for Biden, because to me, and this is what I think is important, is I can disagree with a lot of stuff, but democracy is truly at stake here. And it's we can disagree, we're going to disagree for the next 100 years if we make it there, right?
I think we were going to take some questions from the audience. I was told we were going to take some. So how about you, sir?
Well, first of all, thank you for your military service.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for paying taxes so I could fly airplanes. That was cool.
Secondly, I want to pick up on something you just said a few minutes ago about, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in Congress go to the Muppet Speaker and say, hey, we're not voting on any rules. Am I to understand that there's not a handful of people in Congress who cannot go to the Muppet Speaker and say, hey, we're not going to vote. Bring the bill to the table.
So he was asking if there are not a small number of people who can press Speaker Johnson on Ukraine aid.
I have been talking to the people that would be the eligible ones to do it, and they're holding out hope that this new compromise bill is going to pass. It's not, right? I think the next option, I actually was part of leading a successful discharge petition once on a thing called Export-Import Bank. It's a nuanced thing. And their last successful one was in the 80s, before this one, 2015 or whenever we did it. So I think they're hoping a discharge petition might work, but then you run into an issue on the left where if the Israel aid's in it, you're going to lose some on the far left, and you have to have more. Anyway, I don't know why there are not 4 or 5 people that would just march into his office and do that. Here's the thing. The Freedom Caucus does that. The Freedom Caucus goes in and tanks rules, and that's how they get so much power. And until the quote-unquote normals are willing to play with the same set of rules, sometimes they're always going to get walked over. If I passed out a box of hand grenades and it gave everybody one, we would all be equally powerful, okay? All of us. But whoever's willing to pull the pin is now the most powerful person. So you have to be willing to pull the pin, metaphorically, of course. So I don't know.
Well, one thing that I have heard is I've been asking members who are retiring or who have retired over and over again, they say, Congress is broken, it doesn't work, all these sort of things. It's getting, frankly, it's a sort of ad nauseum. I'm wondering if, when you look back to your time in Congress, what is something that you now think you should have done differently or better or more of or less of to have changed, as you, individual Congressman Adam Kinzinger, to change all these problems that are going on in Congress?
Honestly, there's 2 things. First off, just generally, I kind of, although I wouldn't have survived to the second impeachment, I kind of wish I'd have voted for the first one, because, now I think that for me was a political survival vote. But generally on the tactics, honestly, I wish I would have been willing to do more things like what we're talking about, like tanking rules. Because you go in, I was a team player, and you go in, it's you never vote against a rule, and that is true until the Freedom Caucus started doing it. But generally that is true. I wish I had been willing to play that game a little more then.
Is breaking, they sort of broke the norm, the Freedom Caucus did. I do think that there's a tension here. I'm curious your thoughts. Because at the time, people would have said that's breaking norms, and this is how Congress works, or this is how government is supposed to work. So is breaking the norm okay if you're doing it for the right reasons? What's your response to that tension?
Breaking the norm is okay if you're doing it for the more extreme reason in the Republican Party. I mean, if it's like we're going to be the true conservatives, right? You know, the true whatever, then they do it. If you're breaking the rules because you want to fund Ukraine, and, you know, Tucker's against that, he's going to excoriate you. And those 3 or 4 people that will do it will be icons on the right-wing media, not in a good way. Even though they will build statues to them in Kyiv if they do it. But I think that's part of the problem is it's just like if it's for a more extreme reason, you can break the rules. If you're doing it for good governance, then, you know, you're a rhino or whatever. I don't know.
Let's have I saw your hand up. I'm sorry, I saw your hand up earlier. Do we want to get a microphone?
Thank you. My name's Lenny Glynn from Milton, Massachusetts. I want to first thank you for your service, not just your military service, but your moral service, your political service.
Thank you.
And I want to ask a question that haunts me and causes me fear, and that is it still possible that Nikki Haley may go through one of these humiliating bend-the-knee grovel and endorse this man? And if she does, how does she sleep with, how does she have a decent conscience for the rest of her life? That's the question.
I know. That's a good question. I would have said a month ago, like, yeah, of course she's going to endorse Trump. Although now I'm like, I don't know if I'd bet all my money on that at this point. Because in my mind, it's like she's been actually saying like Liz Cheney things, right? Or like Adam Kinzinger things. And so she may end up staying in just long enough that she doesn't have to make that decision. I don't know. I actually don't think she's going to stay in through the convention or anything. Maybe another race or two. But if she does, well, they may welcome her back, but she loses all credibility, like Tim Scott did and stuff like that. Can I give you guys, though, because I don't want to get through this without forgetting to say this. Like, I actually am pretty optimistic. Not in the near term, okay? So not like in the next year or two, unfortunately. But here's what I'm sensing, and I'm curious if you guys feel this, which is when Donald Trump came along, there was actually this real desire to break the system, right? People felt left out, whatever, and he accidentally kind of caught that wave. But you never know, like historians and sociologists will look back on waves after they happen, and then you see it. I gotta tell you, I'm sensing that it's not now, and it can't happen now, but it's building, like this huge demand among the American people to basically, quote unquote, throw the bums out and heal the system. People are desperate for optimism. You know, I went on a speaking tour this year and I'm like, do you guys want me to be dark or optimistic? Everybody's like, optimism, right? Because they desperately want that. I think it's possible that in the next few years, somebody with a vision can come along and capture a better sense of America and throw these extremes into the toilet. I think. But we got to have the right person to do it.
All right, we've got one more question for you in the back, right there, in the back.
Sorry, guys.
Thank you for coming. There's a reason you're the headliner, and I echo everyone else's gratitude for what you've done. My question, I'm from Illinois. Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. Liz Cheney, one district in her state, they got rid of her. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were redistricted out of a district by the Democrats claiming we need a conservative Republican to stand up for principles. There were 2 of them. You got redistricted out. Is that correct? And what are your feelings about the Democrats in Springfield, Illinois that did that to you?
I'm glad you asked that question because, look, the thing I struggle with is, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure I really wanted to run again anyway, okay? But the broader point is, you know, when it was literally 2 of us fighting for accountability in democracy, and I got specifically targeted by the Democrats. By the way, 10 years ago, they did the same thing to me. And I had a member Republican against Republican primary. And this time they did the same thing again. And that bothered me, not for myself. Like, because I didn't know if I really wanted to stay in Congress anymore. But it bothered me because I'm sitting here saying, if we are going to save this democracy, we have to have a really uncomfortable, unnatural, uneasy alliance between Democrats, the left, the center, and the sane right. Like what is represented here. We're all of that. We're going to have this alliance through this moment. And if you're going to look and say, well, that's a cheap kill, I could take out Kinzinger because, you know, he wouldn't be able to win a member primary. Again, I'm not saying it because like, woe is me. And that's why I haven't talked much about it, because I don't want people to think like it truly bothered me. But what bothered me is the broader message about that, which is, my goodness, are we going to do this or not? The governor of Illinois, Pritzker, was on TV just a month ago. I actually kind of took him on CNN. And he said, whether you vote for Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, or Donald Trump, it's just, are you getting your MAGA this way with heels or whatever? I'm like, if you're going to honestly say that Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are the same threat, you have no idea what you're talking about, and you're the worst spokesman you can put out there.
Always good to end on a round of applause. So thank you very much for answering questions here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.